one important part of being a mixing engineer, being a mastering engineer, is understanding more of my craft. Okay, so we want to understand lots of our craft in terms of different ways of approaching things, how we can manipulate sound, how we can get the best out of new techniques, new processes. But that's breadth, that's width. Going deep is also really important. So understanding the fundamentals of how signal flow occurs, understanding the fundamentals of audio qualities. Something which I learnt 2 days ago was how intermodulation distortion works. Okay? After 8 years, I knew what it was. I didn't understand how it worked. I didn't understand the practicalities of it. And that's why this video is important, because I've got some tests which I put together. I've got some findings which I've come to conclude, and you've got some lessons which you may want to learn from this. So what is intermodulation distortion? Intermodulation distortion is a type of distortion that introduces new frequencies from the sum and difference of fundamentals in the original signal. So I'll give you an example here. I have on this channel an A playing at 440 Hz, and on the second channel a C sharp playing at 277 Hz. I'll unmute them so we can hear that. Let's just open that up. There we go. You can see clearly an A and a C sharp, a major third interval. Now, if we choose to add, now I've got Kelvin tone shaper here, some second order harmonics, have a look what happens to this signal. Ooh, okay. So a second order harmonic of 440 would be 880 Hz, which is there. But what about these frequencies in between? What's 714 Hz? What's 160 Hz? Those are dissonant with this signal. Have a listen. That's not something we want. So why is that happening? Well, that is the sum and difference. That is intermodulation distortion, because I've routed both those signals to a bus. The second order harmonics I'm trying to introduce, and then I've got some intermodulation distortion happening, and it is producing. So 440 plus 277 equals 700 and something there, okay? And then 440 minus 277 equals about 163, which is down there. They're dissonant. So that's not what we want. We want something that is consonant, something that is clean. What happens if instead of placing the harmonic processor on the bus, we place it on the individual sound sources? Let's have a listen to that. Okay, now we just have the second order harmonics purely there. Nothing else. Just there and there. That's just a simple test to show that based on where I place this saturator, it's the exact same saturation with the exact same settings, what happens? I avoid that intermodulation distortion. Now, I've got pretty aggressive settings on this 12 dB of that harmonic drive into that second order harmonics. But what is the sum and difference? So what I've done is, what actually is intermodulation? What does that intermodulation distortion sound like with pure sine waves? And just bear with me on the pure sine waves, because I actually have some stems that we'll be testing on this too. I've got the phase inverted here, and we'll play both these signal paths together. Ooh, look at that. That's not very pleasant. You've got your 714, your 163, and then the sum difference of them, which is 700 and something minus 160 is about 560 there. These are dissonant with that A major chord that is being played by those two signals. That's boring. Those are sine waves. They're not complex signals like what we mix. So who cares? And even then, I will be honest, intermodulation distortion, unless you're really driving hard, you're not going to really be hearing it. So what about in a musical context? So I've got the guitar line and the bass line and two snare layers here from the song Shame by Hannah. I'm going to show you these, okay? I'm going to show you just play them for you so you can hear it. And then what I'm going to do is, I've got both of these different setups. So one with the distortion placed directly on the channels and one with the distortion on the bus. And I'm going to flip the phase again so you can actually hear the difference, so you can actually hear what intermodulation distortion is being introduced to the signal. And it's fucking wild. When you hear it, you'll be like, what the fuck is going on? That's weird as. All right, let's play this. Okay, so that was just clean, one through the saturators on each channel, and another with the saturator on the bus, or that second order harmonics being introduced. So what I'm going to do is now, I'm going to play them both in parallel, have the phase flicked, and this is when shit gets really weird, and I was completely surprised by the results of doing this. Have a listen. It's crazy. How weird is that? That is the intermodulation distortion which is introduced on this section here, because I've got the second order harmonics placed on the bus instead of the individual sources, and it's completely dissonant with the material itself. So what do I take from this? So something I take from this is that there is a stark difference between placing harmonic saturations on individual channels or parallel blending it individually, as opposed to placing harmonic saturators on bust groups of melodic elements, because that intermodulation distortion, especially if you want to drive any harmonics into it, that intermodulation distortion is actually dissonant with the original source. Now, that could be a pleasurable effect which people do enjoy, I'm not sure, maybe with heavier guitars or something, but for my taste and for what I'm learning as I'm going, when I'm exploring this style of distortion or this particular audio quality, is that it isn't pleasant. Because what I'll do is, we'll play these two separate from one another. Having heard the difference, you might be able to pick it out a little bit easier, which one has IMD in it and which one doesn't. One thing I notice is that the bass tends to crunch up quite a bit on the one with the distortion in the bus, simply because when both of them are playing together, it produces more of those lower harmonics of intermodulation distortion which are being introduced, as opposed to when the bass is just on its own, it tends to be a little bit more cleaner. Because if I play the bass here, as opposed to when the guitar's sort of banging it out, it's a bit more crunchier there as opposed to the other section. So the next example I'm going to show you are with snare drum. So I've got two snare layers here, one a high snare, one a deeper lower snare. And like before, I want to play both of them together, and then with the phase inverted, hear what the difference is, or what intermodulation distortion is being introduced by having the harmonic saturation on the bus as opposed to the individual elements. To be honest, because the snares are so harmonically rich, they're percussive, they're not melodic in any nature, I don't think there's going to be, I don't think the intermodulation distortion is actually going to degrade the audio quality all that much or make a discernible difference to the musicality of it, as opposed to something melodic where you've got dissonance being introduced. Let's just have a listen. I'm finding the top end is slightly more pronounced when the saturation is on the bus of those snare hits together, as opposed to when it's on the individual elements. It's slightly warmer, a little bit beefier, you could say. But again, would it make a difference on a mix? Probably not, with a snare drum or a percussive element if you wanted to saturate a bus for them. But more so with melodic elements, I think it's really important to recognize how intermodulation works, how it's calculated, how it actually operates in a particular setting. So ultimately, what can I conclude from this? Well, the amount of intermodulation distortion introduced with just moderate processing harmonic saturation is negligible. Not really going to hear it. So if you've got something like that on a group of instruments in parallel or on a bus, it's not really going to make a difference. The moment where it does make a difference is when you're trying to drive it for creative heavy distortion. If you're actually pushing a harmonic saturator for character and it's across a bus with multiple melodic elements playing in different registers, a lot of dissonance is going to be introduced from that intermodulation distortion, as opposed to if you placed that that sort of character processing, that distortion, that harmonic saturation on the individual channels themselves. In terms of percussive elements, there's a slight tonal difference. It's not a tonal difference which is either bad or good. It's just a tonal difference which will probably change depending on the source material every single time. So it's something that can probably be considered to be played around with as a different way of approaching affecting your drums or percussive elements, whether or not you place that sort of distortion on the individual channel or on the bus groups themselves. But ultimately, it's just been an interesting sort of test. I was really excited when I put this together yesterday because I read it in the book and I'm like, oh, I got to just try this out. And I'm happy I did, because I came to these conclusions, and they might be right, they might be wrong. You can tell me what you think. I think everybody has different interactions and experiences with music and the way they approach it and the way they develop it and the way they create the sound they do. So again, if anybody's had any experiences contrary to what I've said, or they've actually noticed things similar to what I've observed, please leave a comment in the description below. I'm completely open. Nothing I'm saying is a letter of the law. It's just something I've read, something I had a theory on, I tested, and I put into application. And that's that. Thank you. And until next time, take care.